know that I am really saved. You don't know the spouses that talk to me about the salvation of their spouses, as if they question that they're genuinely saved. Now, folks, if anybody knows that you're saved, your spouse should know that you are genuinely saved. I have no question in my mind about the redeemed soul of my wife. Why? Well, because I was there when she prayed. Well, no, I wasn't. Well, because no. But because of the testimony of Christ that lives through her. It's called character. And that's what we're dealing with here. Now, as we predetermine that we're going to function as a Christian, that brings us to another point that Peter brings out. Number one, then as a man, I need to be predisposed, which means pre-given to, by the way, that Bible-centered understanding that Peter talks about in verse 7. He says that you dwell with them according to knowledge. Now, this knowledge that he's talking about brings us to this word, I just use it as a synonym, that I must learn, I must understand, I must be considerate of her. Now, I'm not just talking about opening up doors, carrying in groceries and that kind of stuff. I'm talking about being considerate of her person. Here it is. Of who she is. Of her needs in her life, whether physical, spiritual, mental, emotional. Whatever her needs are, I have to be considerate of those things. Now, why? Well, because if you don't, she'll leave you. Okay? No, that's not why. Because that's what God teaches the man's role is. I am to be considerate of my wife. In other words, we don't make decisions apart from one another, etc., etc. And I must be sensitive toward those things. That this individual woman, this particular woman, has spiritual needs, physical needs, emotional needs, and only I am responsible to meet those needs. And if I don't meet those needs, no one will. So I have failed. That's a character issue. That we're to esteem as believers others loftier than ourselves, including her. So number one, I have to be predisposed to be considerate of her and her needs. So 1 Corinthians, for instance, in 1 Corinthians 7, 3 through 5, if you want the reference, and you need it, by the way, but if you're not going to turn, it's okay. Let me read it to you. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence. Now, how do you do that apart from consideration? How do you do that? And I know the context there, but I'll go ahead and read it for you. And likewise also the wife to the husband. The wife hath not power over her body, but the husband. And likewise also the husband hath power over his own body, not over his own body, but the wife. Defraud ye not one another, except be for consent, etc., etc. And there he's talking about, of course, intimate needs and physical needs. I understand all that, but I'm just saying, how do you do that without being considerate toward her? Toward her. Unfortunately, on many occasions, that fulfillment is done because the man, whatever his mood is and whenever he gets time, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, rather than being a gift for her, for his spouse rather, and her for her spouse. Listen to Proverbs. Let thy fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of thy youth. Let her be as a loving hind and pleasant roe. Let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love. Listen how considerate God calls upon us to be of our spouses. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It is not one or the other. It is all the above. All the above. Secondly, I must be a practitioner of chivalry. Now, when I use the word chivalry, Peter rather, is saying, likewise, you husbands dwell with them according to knowledge, okay, consideration, giving honor unto the wife. Now, he uses a word here that will be complemented by the fact that Paul, in Ephesians chapter 5, when he talks about husband loving their wives, he refers to he that loveth his wife, loveth his own body, and etc. And he said, because you cherish your body and you nourish your body. All that put together comes to this conclusion, this conglomeration comes to this conclusion. And that is this, as we address this subject for a man's role or a man's responsibility in chivalry, we're saying he takes the form of a knight. A noble man in the kingdom. He is to practice nobility. He is her knight in shining armor, if you want to put it that way. To be her knight in shining armor. Now, he may not be. The armor may be a little dull, but I'm just saying we polish up a little bit today anyway. But he's her knight in shining armor. He's the guy who would lay his cloak over the mud puddle and let her walk. He's the guy that would protect her from all the enemies of the kingdom, including the spiritual enemies of the kingdom and social enemies of the kingdom. He protects her. He provides for her the things of God, the Word of God, the fellowship with God, the communion with God, the leadership of God. He's that kind of guy. He's a knight, a noble figure in her life, a man of nobility, integrity, and character. That's what he's saying. So it's more than just, I dwell with her according to knowledge, giving honor unto her, open the door, etc., etc. Now here's what that does, as if she's the weaker vessel. Let me tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that my wife is inferior. Nor does it mean that your wife is. It does not mean that my wife suffers from a deficiency in character. She doesn't. It does not mean that my wife suffers in comparison to me intellectually. God help her on that one. She doesn't suffer from that. That my wife is less than me before God spiritually. It does not mean any of the above. Okay? What it does mean that God takes into character consideration rather, her nature. And I mean by that her physical nature. Now let me take you back to the garden. After the fall. Okay? God's straightening things out. Genesis 3. He tells Eve, this is what's going to happen to you in childbirth, etc. He tells the serpent, of course he told the serpent, he tells Eve. He gets to Adam, and he puts all this workload on Adam. Have you ever thought about that? Now she had to be as redeemed as Adam had to be after the fall. Okay, both of them were clothed after the fall. The two had become one flesh, by the way. You ever thought about that? Could it possibly be that her nature, by her nature, her physical nature, she was a weaker vessel than Adam, physically speaking? And the answer to that is yes. By the way, she was weaker. God created her as a helpmeet. Okay, she's not the man. Be careful to recognize that by nature we're different. You know, I don't expect Ed to lift some things that I lift. Okay, I don't expect her to do some of the work that I do. I don't even ask her. I don't want her to. Period. Why? Out of honor to her and her nature. And God says we need to recognize this. Why? Because that puts me back in responsibilities. Responsibility is what? Number one, I'm a provider. Timothy said this, if I don't provide for my own, I'm worse than an infidel denying the faith. So that's a constant teaching throughout the Scriptures. But I'm a servant protector as well. So I do on her behalf things to protect her as a servant to her. As a knight would do his fair damsel, if you please, or his fair maiden. I do those things. That's what Peter's saying. So these become character issues. Do you understand this? These are not just, boy, my husband's a lazy bum. That's a character issue. It's a character issue that goes all the way back to his relationship with Jesus Christ.